Today's daf we're going to be learning is Shevuot Daf Memchet. Today's daf is sponsored by Rena Kors in loving memory of Dr. Litris Rabinsky on her 7th yahrzeit. She instilled the love of learning in all the children, grandchildren, and generations of students. May her memory be for a blessing. Okay, we're almost at the end of our Masechet. We're excited too on Sunday, Be'ezrat Hashem, barring all unforeseen circumstances, we will be celebrating the Siyum of Masechet Shevuot together on Zoom. We have a great program lined up. God willing, we will get there. We will not be interrupted by sirens. I just want to add, a personal note that it's been a very rough few days here in Israel. People have been killed from Iranian attacks. People have been in the middle of the nights running to shelters also during the day. It's been very, very tense. People like my daughter and some good friends of ours, their weddings have been pushed off and indefinitely. So a lot of turmoil and a lot of stress, and kids are home from school for an indefinite amount of time, which creates a struggle for the families. Anyway, our hearts are with everybody and praying for everyone's safety. Okay, we are going to get started. Not to mention, by the way, the soldiers who have been killed this week in Gaza, in addition to, all the other things going on. So in general, it's been a week. Okay, let's get to our Gemara. Our solace always is finding solace in words of Torah, finding it is a bit of a directing our energies, at least for a short portion of our day, grounding us in what's important and gaining perspective. Okay, with that, we'll get started. We started this machloket between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda on the bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Bet. If you have two groups of witnesses who contradict each other, and then we know that one of them is lying, can't we accept these witnesses' testimonies in other cases when they're not testifying against each other, but one of the groups comes to testify? Do we say, well, look, there's a good chance we know one of them is lying, so maybe we shouldn't accept, there's like a 50-50 chance that there's a liar here, that that these two witnesses that came from some other case that perhaps were liars there, maybe we shouldn't accept their testimony. That's what Rav Chisda says. Shakari Lamale. Why am I going to be with a group, with potentially allowing false witnesses in court? And Rav Huna says, no, each group comes independently. No problem. We don't know. Maybe you're lying, maybe you're not. Maybe you lied before, maybe you're not. Let's accept them. So now we're going to have a question. Mativ Rav Huna bar Yehuda. Difficulty on Rav Chisda, who said we don't accept them as witnesses. Echad Omer. We've seen sugyot like this before. This comes from Masechet Rosh Hashanah. We're talking about witnesses who testify about the new moon. Had Omer gavash temer da'ot. Echad Omer shalosh. So one says it was two, I forgot what a mardea, it's one of these implements used for animals. So one says the mardea, it was two mardeot tall, and one says it was three, edutan kayemet, because we can assume that, right, how big the moon, right, how high in the sky the moon was. We can assume that, right, how high it was from the ground. We can assume that they just, it's hard to measure exactly when you're looking up at that sky. There's no real contradiction. But they were between 3 and 5, seems like contradictory testimony. Rashi says Mardeot is Milameda Bakar. I think it's the prodder they use to prod the animals. Okay, so we cancel their testimony, right? One who said 3, one who said 5, but we accept the testimony if they would testify in a different case. My lav le'edut mamon. Now, wouldn't we think, right? They can join another witness when it comes to money, meaning we're not suspect that they're liars. So that goes against Rav Chisda, who said once contradictory, they're involved in contradictory testimony. We assume we know one of them is lying, so we shouldn't accept either one of them in the court. So I'm a Rava. No. Rava said you misunderstood. And it said, mitzarfin le'edut acheret, what they mean is, huvacher mitzarfin le'edut acheret shel Rosh Chodesh. As if one of them finds another witness, each one was only one witness. If one of them finds another witness that can corroborate what they said, then they become a group of two. Then they're two against one, and then they're believed. And it has nothing, right? One compared to two, right? When you have one witness saying one, let's say one said 3, and two witnesses now say 5, then it worked. Even if, at first it was 3 again, one said 3, one said 5, and then second witness came to say 5, we're going to believe the 5 against the 3 because two witnesses are more than one, and we just ignore it, right? The one witness actually becomes not believed. But this has nothing to do with if one said 3, one said 5, Are we going to accept their testimony in some other financial case later? No, it's not relevant. Okay, now back to the Mishnah. We're going to go through the two cases that were kind of the same case. We're going to eventually ask why do they have both cases, but we're going to start with the first. Someone says to the storekeeper, give me a dinar's worth of produce. And then he takes the produce. And then the storekeeper says, give me the dinar. And the person says, I already gave you the dinar. Right? So we had a machloket in the Mishnah. Let's go back for a quick minute. Tanakama said Yishava Balabayit. Okay, the person who went into the store has to take the oath that they pay the money and they don't have to pay. But Rabbi Yehuda said no, they don't even have to take an oath because Rabbi Yehuda said we assume the money was given. Okay, because no storekeeper would give the produce without getting the money. So now we're going to have a braita which says something about Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Tanya, Ma Rabbi Yehuda, Ematai. Now, Ematai, they explain is when, right? Ematai means when. When do I agree with the first position? I agree with the first position in a particular case. If the perot are in front, like sitting right there, then I agree that you have to, and there's this debate, did they pay the money or not? I agree that you have to take an oath. But if he already put it on his shoulder and put it, in a bag on it around his shoulders, with the bag hanging behind his back, we assume nobody would let them kind of walk out of the store without having paid, or get ready to walk out the store with the produce on top of them. So if the produce is still sitting on the ground in the store, then it's possible they paid, it's possible they didn't pay, and then you'd have to have the person buying it take the oath. But if they already put it in the satchel on their shoulders, then already we assume that they must have paid. And then okay, that's that's the same language. It's different language as in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said just to see, but it really means all one and the same, which is in the Mishnah it says, I'm just going to find it. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shapirot biyado yado ala elyona. The one who has the produce in hand has the upper hand, which basically means if the storekeeper wants to take the money from him, the burden of proof lies on the storekeeper. So it means the same thing. It's just written in different words. Now we're going to have Amar the Shulchani. Now we're going to have to understand why do we have the exact same case and the exact same machloket with the money changer and getting the change before the money was paid, or at least the Shulchani, the money changer, claims I didn't get paid my money for it. So Amar the Shulchani Tanli v'chulei utzricha. We need them both. Why? Yesh mina hachkamaita. If you had only the first one about the produce, you would have said. Bahaka Amri Rabbanit. There, the rabbis say the person has to take the oath of one who bought the produce because there's a chance that maybe they didn't pay yet, and there's a chance the storekeeper let them get away without paying. Why is that? Well, if the storekeeper's in a bit of a rush, then the storekeeper will allow the produce to go to the other side before getting the money. Why? What kind of rush? Well, because produce can rot, and therefore this concern is Kevin de Merkave lo mashule. If the produce rots, then the storekeeper is not going to get the business. So basically, the assumption is the storekeeper might be willing to give the produce before it rots 5 minutes later. Again, it's hard to say in 5 minutes, but let's say before getting the money, because they want to make sure the sale goes through and they'll worry about getting their money after. But maybe when it comes to money, that the money's not going to rot. There's no rush. There's no the shulchani, the money lender, is not trying to get money changer, is not trying to get the money out quickly, and therefore maybe the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda. In that case, the money changer is not going to give out the change until the money changer gets the payment. The Idmar Baha, and now we're going to do it the reverse. In other words, again, then the point is no, they disagree in both cases. There might have been reason to think they don't, but no, they disagree in both cases. And now we'll do the same logic, but in the reverse direction. Idmar Baha, if you had it with the money changer, you would say Bahaka Amar Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. No way would the money changer give out the change before getting the money. Aval Bahach, but with the produce, because the money changer, because the storekeeper wants to get rid of the produce as quickly as possible to make sure the sale goes through. And therefore it's shricha. That's why you needed to say there's a machloket in both cases. The logic we suggested doesn't really matter when it comes to the halacha. Okay, next situation in the Mishnah. If you already claim you already got paid part of the k'tuba money, then, right, you admit that I already got some of my money, then you have to take an oath about the rest. And also the orphans don't don't collect money unless they've sworn. And now we said miman. Now we have to understand, and this is the exact sugya we saw in yesterday's daf. What are we talking about here? Okay, and we're going to repeat this again, then go into it more. Miman, who are the yatomim collecting from that they need to take an oath about it? If we're saying they want to get it from the love, him or herself, the one they lent to, it makes absolutely no sense that the orphans can't collect the loan the way their father could. If their father could collect it without taking an oath, why should we make them take an oath? Right? Their power, their ability to collect this loan is from the power of their father. And if their father didn't need an oath, why should they need an oath? If the father could have collected from the creditor, from the borrower on their own, right? So without taking any sort of oath. So therefore they say Hachikamra. This is the way to read the Mishnah. If both the malva and the lova, the borrower, the creditor and the borrower died and left orphans, the orphans of one can only collect from the orphans of the other with an oath. So now we get to this big important halacha of Rabban Shmuel that we saw yesterday as well, and we're going to get more into it, and we're going to see kind of the reactions to this, what Rabban Shmuel said. Rabban Shmuel da Amrei Travayu, both of them said, Lo shanu ella. Now it's going to depend on the order of who died when. Lo shanu ella. The Mishnah is talking about a case shemeit malva b'chaye love. First, the malva died while the love was still alive, which means the borrower is still alive, and then basically you're going to have the malva die first, and then the yatomim, basically, what's the story? First, the orphans of the malva are supposed to collect from the borrower, but then the borrower dies, the orphans have to collect from the other orphans, and in that case, they need to take an oath, okay? And what's their oath? They need to take an oath that our father never, right, didn't, right, collect this loan at all. Okay, that's the case. We'll see, that's just a basic case. But now we're going to see why it doesn't work in the opposite direction. We can't have a situation where their father was obligated to oath and now they inherit the oath of their father, because you can't pass on the oath of the father to the sons. We talked about this in the previous stuff. There were possible reasons, one of them being that the children can't take the same oath. And once the father was obligated in that oath, right, what's the obligation of the oath? The father has to say to orphans, if first the lova died, the borrower died, and then the malva is still alive, the creditor. The creditor goes to collect from the orphans. Anyone who collects from orphans has to take an oath that I didn't collect the loan yet. And therefore, the sons of that person, right, the sons of the creditor, when the creditor then dies, they can't inherit that same oath because they can't take the same oath their father was obligated to take because they don't know if their father collected the loan. The only thing they could say is, well, our father didn't tell us anything about that this loan was already collected. But that's a different oath, right? At least that was one of the reasons we gave. So now, that's what Rabban Shmuel said. So basically, what comes out in that case, and that's how we explain the whole Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Meir thing about what does it mean, right, depending on who said it, but that the Shevuot goes back to its original place. Basically, we have a situation here where it's very similar to that, where neither one can take the oath, where basically the orphans of the creditor can't take the oath because they can't take the oath their father could have taken. So there's no oath to be taken on their side. The other side can't take an oath because they have no idea. They're orphans of their father. Their father was the one who took the loan. They have no idea if their father paid the loan back or not. Neither side can take an oath. And then, explained from yesterday, the money just stays where it is, meaning those children of the malva, of the creditor, can't collect this loan. And therefore, the Mishnah is not talking about that case, obviously, because the Mishnah allows them to collect with an oath. So now I just want you to understand before we get into this, because we're going to see how much the rabbis struggle with this, because this basically means if you say this, anyone who's either older and lending to someone who's older, they're going to say, why would I do this? Or someone who's just worried, fatalist, like, what if I die and what if they die? It's going to prevent people from loaning money because they're going to say, if my orphans won't have a way to collect this loan from the other guy's orphans, then why do I want to lend them money? I may never see this money again. So now the Gemara is going to explain that Shachu Kamei de Rabbi Elazar. They sent this to Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Shmuel in Babylonia. This whole sugya would be very interesting if you really learned it more from geographical perspective and who's studying under who. It's very interesting because we're going to get all these Babylonian rabbis involved and also rabbis in Israel. There's a lot of things to be noting on a geographical sense. Okay. Anyway, we're going to put that. We don't have enough time to really go into it, but we'll mention it a little bit here and there. So Shachua came to Rabbi Elazar. They sent it to Rabbi Elazar in Israel, and he said, "Shvuazom." They asked him, "Shvuazom mativa." Okay, so now, why? What they're really saying is, why is the father's shvuah so important that we basically say that the sons now can't collect because of it? In other words, once the father has to take this oath, then we can't pass on to the children. Then the children have no way to collect it. So shalach lehu. So he sent back to them, Yorshim nishbein shvuat yorshim benotlim. He says, you're right. I don't agree with Rabban Shmuel. And I think that those children, it's not, it's an important oath, but there's another replacement oath by the children. The children can say, listen, our father never told us, as we saw in the Mishnah. And that would apply here too as well. So he disagrees. Shachua b'yimei Rabbi Ami. Now, in the time of Rabbi Ami, they asked the same question to Rabbi Ami that they asked to Rabbi Elazar and already got the answer, you can do it. But they were still struggling with this, Rabban Shmuel. I guess they want to just reject Rabban Shmuel. Amar kulei hai shalchale v'azli. What are you still asking the same question? You asked already Rabbi Elazar. If we had found a reason to explain Rabban Shmuel's position better, don't you think we would have sent you already? But in any case, Rabbi Ami anyway responds to them and says, if already you're going to ask me this question, I'm going to tell you something about it. And now he says, Amad bidin v'meit, kfar nitchayev mavel lebnei lo v'shvua, ve'ein adam marish shvua lebanav. He says, I'm going to distinguish between two cases. And maybe you'll understand Rabban Shmuel better, or maybe this helps you with understanding Rabban Shmuel better. I'm going to limit Rabban Shmuel. And this is something that we're going to see in general, that there were rabbis who tried to limit the scope of Rabban Shmuel, because really it's difficult, like I said from before. So he says, Amad b'din v'meit. If they stood up for judgment already, the malveh, in other words, when the lova dies, the malveh, the creditor, wants to get the money back from the orphans, he has to take an oath. So if he was in the court already, and was obligated to take an oath in the court. He was already obligated the oath. And now, because the court ordered that oath, and that oath can no longer be taken by the person's children because the person never took the oath, died. Therefore, I'll agree with Rabban Shmuel in that case. However, and maybe even Rabban Shmuel only said it in that case. But lo amad b'din v'meit, but if the malveh was never put on trial about this, was never, they never claimed the money yet, right? He never came and claimed the money, and then the court said, and never said, you have to take an oath. Well, then it's like an oath kind of floating in the air. Never happened yet, because the oath is only when the person goes to collect, when the creditor goes to collect. So lo amabadim v'meit. The person died before they even tried to collect the loan, and was brought it to court. Yorshim nishbein shvuat, yorshim v'notzlim. Then there was no obligation yet of an oath. Then the orphans can actually claim it back. So that limits Rabban Shmuel's case to only when the person was already obligated the oath by the court. But Matkevla Rav Nachman says, what are you talking about? Atu Beidina? Is it the court that obligates the shvuah of the orphans, right? Someone who wants to collect their loan back from orphans. That's not the court that institutes that shvuah. Me'idna de shachid lover, from the moment that the debtor, the borrower, died, immediately kicks in the oath. So we have this debate between Rav Nachman on one hand and Rabbi Ami on the other. Again, one in Israel, one in Babylonia. Rav Nachman's in Babylonia, and Rabbi Ami's in Israel, about whether the oath of the father kicks in right away to collect from the orphans of the other, or it only kicks in when the court says you have to take the oath. And according to the one who says, Rabbi Ami, that it's only when the court, then Rabban Shmuel would only be in that case. Because if the oath hasn't come in yet to play, then the children, if that creditor were to die, that person's children wouldn't have to pay the loan back yet. That person's children could claim the loan without taking the oath. Okay, now, Ella Amar Rav Nachman, so since Rav Nachman didn't agree with that, Rav Nachman thinks that Rav and Shmuel were across the board. whether it was a court, whether it wasn't in court, that Shevuot can't pass on to the children. And therefore, Rav and Shmuel are limiting the case in our Mishnah to only a case where the creditor died first and not the borrower. Elam Rav Nachman ita Rav Shmuel ita ileta leta. What he says is, look, if you hold like Rav and Shmuel, then you hold like Rav and Shmuel. If you don't, you don't. In other words, what he's saying is there are two different approaches, though. Remember, there's also Rabbi Elazar and Alma Misapkale. So now they say, wait, it sounds like from here. Now, what he's saying is kind of a weird statement, but he's saying like, maybe we hold like Rav and Shmuel, maybe we hold like Rabbi Elazar. Now, if you say maybe we hold, the important thing to understand is if we don't know who we hold like, what do? Well, we always leave things status quo. What would status quo mean? Status quo would mean that, and that's what he's basically saying is, even though we don't all agree, not everyone agrees with Rav and Shmuel, and we're not sure if they're right or not. So it doesn't matter. In the end, we're going to have to hold like Rav and Shmuel, because what do Rav and Shmuel say? You can't collect the loan back, which is basically status quo. Wherever the money is, the money stays. It means the same thing. So based on that, the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. Alma Misapkale, you're saying he didn't know whether we hold like Rav and Shmuel or like Rabbi Elazar, which would mean leave status quo and, until anything proven, we can't do anything, meaning the creditors, orphans, can't get back the loan at all. Now, again, going back to the case in our Mishnah, where neither side can take an oath, and the premise of this sugya is that this is a case of neither side being able to take an oath, as I mentioned earlier. And then we can compare it to that case, which is Rav Yosef bar Menyumi said, Avi Rav Nachman uvada, there was a case where neither side could take an oath. And what did Rav Nachman say? Yachloku, he paskin yachloku. So how could he say, right, split it 50-50, which would mean the creditor in our case would get back half the loan. So how can you say we're not sure what to do? Everything should say status quo. And then another case, he said yachloku. So they say no. Lidvarav de Rabbi Meir Kamar v'leilo svirale. When he did his uvada, he was doing it like Rabbi Yossi, who said chozeret shvualim koma. But sorry, right, I get confused because we changed. Who said what? 1 minute. Let me just think about it. Lidvarav de Rabbi Meir Kamar. Right. When he was talking before about if you hold like Rav and Shmuel, if you don't, that was all according to Rabbi Meir, who holds chozeret shvualim koma, and then basically we're going to leave things status quo. But leilo svirale, but he actually didn't hold that way. And he actually held like Rabbi Yossi, who in the flipped version, if you remember, Rav Nachman had the opposite version. Rabbi Yossi is the one who said yachloku, and that's why when it came to a case where neither side could take the oath, he split it 50-50. So we have Rav Nachman talking one way in a theoretical discussion, according to Rabbi Meir, who holds that chozeret shvualim koma. Then, if you hold like Rav and Shmuel, right, we're not sure if you hold like Rav and Shmuel, we're not sure if you hold like the other position, Rabbi Elazar, and therefore we're going to leave the money where it is because chozeret shvualim koma. But that was all in a theoretical discussion according to Rabbi Meir's school of thought. But if you go to Rabbi Yossi, who holds yachloku, then, and that's what Rabbi Nachman did, that's why he passed in some other case, yachloku. Now we're going to start with a slew of questions. So let's just review what we did until now. We started with what's the case of the Yatomim Lo Yiparu Ela B'Shvuah. We had to, number one, say Yatomim Lo Yiparu Mi Yatomim Ela B'Shvuah. We limit already that case to orphans collected from orphans, not orphans collected from anyone else. Anyone else, they should be able to collect directly without having taken oath. Then we had Rav and Shmuel who even limit that and say when they're collecting from orphans, they only need to take an oath, right? They can take an oath and get their money, right, in a particular case, but they can't take an oath in another case. If their father was already obligated an oath because the lova died first, then they can't take an oath at all, and then they can't collect their money. So we also limit it. So number one, they only get from orphans with an oath. Number two, there's some cases where they can't collect from orphans at all. Forget about needing an oath. Even an oath won't help them, and that's if they inherit their father's oath. Okay, if their father was already obligated. Within that, we had maybe only if the father was obligated by the court, maybe not. Right? We had a difference of opinion there between Rabbi Ami and Rav Nachman about that. And then we saw Rav Nachman basically said, no, they really can't collect at all in that, right? Whether it was in court or whether it wasn't in court, once the father's obligated an oath, they can't collect. Now we're going to have Mativ Rav Oshai. So we're going to have 4 questions, okay, from different people. Rav Oshai brings, now the first 3 are from Mishnayot in Ketubot. So Rav Oshai says, Meta, okay, we have a Mishnah in Ketubot where the woman dies. Now, a woman dies, doesn't get her Ketubah money if she dies before the husband. Meta, Yorshea, but in this case, she died after the husband died. Okay, we're going to have a few different cases here. So if the woman dies after the husband dies, then her heirs can collect the k'tuba money that she was owed by the husband's family, by the husband. And now she's going to collect it. Her orphans are going to collect it from who? From the orphans of the husband, because the husband's already dead also. So that's a case of orphans from orphans. Now let's see what they say. Meta. Now who? Okay, let's see who's like who, because we're going to go in the order. The woman is really a creditor here. She's like the malveh. So if she dies second, right, that's going to be exactly like our case of Rabban Shmuel wouldn't allow collection, right? Because if she dies second, she's like the malveh. And what do we say? If the lova dies first, and she was supposed to collect from the orphans only with an oath, then her children, when they want to collect, can only do it with an oath, and they can't take that oath. So therefore, there's no collection, according to Rabban Shmuel. Now, what does it say in the Mishnah? For 25 years, they can get back, right? They can't, and they can still, there's a, I forgot the word, it'll come to me, but there's a certain deadline. After 25 years, they can no longer collect. If they didn't collect the k'tuba within 25 years, it's too late. But what does it show? You could collect for 25 years. So therefore, it seems like they can collect from the orphans of the husband. Orphans from orphans, even though Rabban Shmuel would say, no way can you do that in this case. So what do they answer? It must have been she took the oath already, and then we don't have an issue. Her oath was taken. She took an oath before she died and said, I swear I never get any money back from the ketubah, and then she dropped dead. In that case, her orphans could collect without an oath because she took the oath already. And we do the same thing with the next source. Tashma, Nasari Shona, this is going to be a little more complicated. It's a man who has two wives. You have to remember there's something called the ketubah b'nin dichrin. I'll explain to you what it is for those who don't remember. It's the ketubah of the male children. When a woman gets married, she brings in this whole dowry to the wedding, and she gets ketubah promised her of, she can bring her money back and all this other stuff. Now, to encourage, right, stuff the husband has to obligate her. To encourage her father to give her the dowry, they were worried, look, if the husband has two wives, or even when she's alive, or maybe even when she dies, then all her money is going to get lost. And basically, that's what happens when a woman dies. The husband inherits her ketubah because she only gets the ketubah in the event that he divorces her or he dies first. If she dies first, she loses her ketubah. It goes to the husband. Then what happens? It's divided among the heirs. Now, it's great. Her children will get her ketubah anyway because the husband inherits, and from inherits her ketubah, and then his children, which her children, will also get it as well. What's the problem? If he has other wives, either at the time or later marries other wives, and dies later after having other children, that money, or previous children, that money of hers will end up being divided equally among all his sons, not only hers. So the ketubah in dichrin is that when the Yerusha is divided up, when the inheritance is divided, those sons get her portion of the ketubah first, and from there, the rest of the Yerusha is divided. So if you had two wives, let's say, who already got their, right, who never got their ketubah, let's say he, lived longer than both his wives, they were both dead already, then we take ketubah for one, right, the ketubah of one wife, give to those children. Ketubah of the other wife, give to their children. Then they divide up whatever's left evenly. Okay, that's the background for this. So according to this Mishnah, if he married one first, then she died, Meta. Nasa shniya v'meitu. Now, the first one lost her ketubah, right? Other than the ketubah in dichrin. The second one he got married to, and then he died first. So she gets her ketubah. What's the problem? Then she died. And now it's her orphans trying to get the ketubah from his orphans, as well as the first wife's orphans trying to get the ketubah in dichrin from the estate. So how does it work? Shniya v'yorshea kodbim liyorshea rishona. So the second children, what happens? Well, since the second children, it's an obligation. It's not part. The ketubah in dichrin is really part of the dina Yerusha, as I said, when they divide the Yerusha, the estate. But first, before you divide, they're going to get first the portion of their mother's ketubah. But first, you have to deal with something that's a chov. There's a monetary responsibility, which is the ketubah itself of the second wife was supposed to be collected by the woman. She died before she collected it, but basically, before the estate is divided, first, her heirs get it. And where do they get it from, right? They're going to basically take the oath to the other orphans that first we get our ketubah money, okay? And that is an oath, orphans from orphans. And it's an oath where first, right, first the mother died. One second. First, right, those orphans, she died. First, the mother was alive and could have collected from the husband. And basically to the husband's heirs. She was alive after the husband died. She had the oath, and now these kids are taking the oath also, even though they shouldn't be able to, according to Rav and Shmuel. So again, the answer, it must be she took the oath and then died. Okay, so again, if the oath was taken, then it's a different story. Tashma, third Mishnah from Ketubot. Aval yorshav mashbi'in ota, ve'et yorsheha, ve'et haba'im birshuta. This is a case where there was a t'nai. There was a condition stipulated that the woman or her heirs will not need to take an oath to get the ketubah. Okay, the husband promised. Okay, if there's a situation and you want to get your ketubah money, I promise you will not have taken an oath about anything or a vow. Not you, not your heirs either. Okay, if you die, your heirs won't have trouble collecting. They won't have to take an oath. So now it's he promised he wouldn't demand the oath. But what didn't he promise? That his heirs won't demand an oath. So what does it say here? Aval yorshav must be inotah ve'et yorsheha. His heirs can either make her take the oath, okay, and also yorsheha, also her heirs. So that means his heirs can make her heirs take the oath. Now, again, that would be a case where she was obligated first to the orphans to take the oath because she'll be obligated to his heirs. That's the first line here. And then if she doesn't take the oath and then dies, her heirs can take the oath also. That's again Rav and Shmuel. How could she can't pass her oath down onto her children according to Rav and Shmuel? She was obligated first. And etabim b'shuta, and anyone who comes on her behalf. Also, because he only promised, I won't demand an oath from you, but other people can demand an oath from her or from anyone who comes on her account. So how do we resolve this? Amar Shmaya, let's study Katani. Don't count this as his Yorshim can make her take an oath, and then when she dies, her orphans, meaning in the same situation. No, each one is a different situation, and they're two different things. Meaning the orphans don't take the oath when she dies, and she could have collected from the husband. We're going to explain now what does it mean. Otaba almana. Okay, if she's a widow, the husband dies. What basically he's saying is, I won't make you take an oath if I'm still alive. Like if I divorced you, I'll give you your ketubah without a problem. But like, let's say you're moda b'miktzat, you admit half and not the other, you won't have to take the oath. But my heirs can make you take an oath because that's classic anyway. You know, you have to take an oath to the orphans. But when it says at your shah, that wouldn't be in that case. If she died, she can't pass that oath down onto her children. But your shah bigrusha, if the husband divorced her and then she was trying to collect the money, never did, and then she dies, when the heirs come, they can collect from the husband, not from orphans, and it's not the case of Rabban Shmuel. They collect from the husband directly. He could make them take an oath that their mother never told them it was collected. You know, then it's the oath of the orphans that we saw in the Mishnah. So that's not a question either. Another question of Rabban Shmuel. There's some way that the child can actually collect money more easily from the father, turning out on Amubet. Shaben goveh. Bein b'shvua, bein shelo b'shvua. A son can collect sometimes with an oath, sometimes without an oath. And a father can only collect with an oath. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about a father collecting a loan from orphans. Okay, so the father, the only way to collect from orphans is with an oath. However, the son sometimes collects with an oath, sometimes without an oath. Now, the difference between the son and the father is the case about without an oath. What interests us is with an oath, and you'll see this in a minute. So hechidami, what's the case? Demate love b'chaye malve. It must be that the love died first. The borrower died, and then there were orphans. That's what I said before. It would have to be there's only an oath because the orphans are trying to collect. They're right are meant to pay, and the only way to collect from orphans is to take an oath. And then the malve was still alive, and then the malve died after. So again, if the malve was still alive, that's the case where the father would have to collect with the shvuah. And the orphans, it sounds like, would be goveh b'shvua. Okay, v'katani shaben goveh ben b'shvua ben shelo b'shvua. So let's go to and explain each case. B'shvua is for the yorshim. It must be what's the oath they're going to say. The oath must be our father didn't tell us that this loan was collected already, and then that would go against Rabban Shmuel because Rabban Shmuel said those orphans can't take that oath. What's shelo b'shvua, which again doesn't really interest us, just so we can explain this braita. Shelo b'shvua is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that we saw in the Mishnah. That the only case they don't take an oath is if somebody said, oh, we heard the father on, two witnesses said, we heard the father on the deathbed say this loan was never collected, then the sons actually don't have to take an oath. And that was the whole point of the braita, that there's a difference between the father and the son because the father would always have to take an oath from orphans. But if the father said on his deathbed, I never collected this loan, then the sons wouldn't need an oath. But again, what's the main thing? That the sons could take an oath in the case of Meit Lova B'chai Malva, which is the exact case that Rav and Shmuel say there's no way you could take an oath. So Amar Rav Yosef Hamane, okay, this we're going to resolve in some other way by saying Beit Shammai Damar Shtaro Me L'Gavo Kikavoy Dami. This Braita must be like Beit Shammai, who we don't hold by anyway, but what has Beit Shammai said? If there's a loan that's supposed to be collected and there's a document that says it, it's as if it was already collected. So when those orphans go to collect from the other orphans, their loan of their father, they don't need to take an oath because that star says they're owed the money, and it's as if it was collected. And Rashi even says, at the very end of Rashi, Dibor Mitcha Beit Shammai, it's a very long Rashi, says, Mamon Gamor Hu Lahorish Lebanav. That father is owed the money. It's like it's money. It's like having a dollar bill in your hand. By having a document that says you owe me, it's as if there's a dollar bill in his hand. That means that it's actual money that he could just pass on to his children. And then his children should just collect that without an oath. But that's Beit Shammai, we don't hold that way. And that's why that source doesn't create a problem, assuming you go with this answer. Now we're going to start with the rabbi's attempt to get rid of this whole thing of Rav and Shmuel. Again, because Rav and Shmuel make it very difficult for people to loan money. They're going to say, I'll never get my money back. If they die and then I die, I'll have no way to collect. So Ikla Rav Nachman l'Sura. Rav Nachman gets to Surah. Okay, Rav Nachman was a Rav in Hardau, which was Shmuel's city. You can see he paskins like Shmuel. And he gets to Surah, which was Rav's city. Now, in this case, Rav and Shmuel are all the same. It's not like that would make the difference. But just to give you a little geographical significance, so when he gets to Surah, he goes in front of Rav Chisda and Rav Bar Huna. Amrulay, and they say to him, Leitemar na'akil hadarav and Shmuel. Let's uproot this halacha. Come on, you're here. Let's just do it. This is a terrible, right? There's a bad thing, this takana. Let's get rid of it. Amar lehu. Now remember, he was a prize student of Shmuel. He said, you think I came all this way? Parse is parsaot. You think I parasangs. You think I traveled all this way, all these parasangs, to come and uproot Rabbi Shmuel's halacha? No way, no how. Ella but what I will do is I'm not willing to undo what my rabbi said, but I am willing to say we're not going to add any more cases to what they already forbid. In other words, I'm not willing to get rid of it, but let's keep it to where they said it and not apply it to any other cases. So, kigomai, like what, for example? To Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa was, Rav Nachman is second/third generation. Rav Papa is already fifth generation, and now they're quoting a case, for example, that Rav Papa said. To Amar Rav Papa, hapogem. Okay, we're going to see Rav Papa and Rav Chama, who are going to come into play later, are both fifth generation Amoraim. Hapogem et shterov amet, yorshav nishbin shvuot yorshim v'notlim. If somebody collected and admitted that they collected part of their loan already, but has the deed in hand, and then dies, so theoretically they collect the whole loan, but they admitted in court that they collected part. Normally you need to take the oath. In this case, the orphans can say, our father never told us that he got the rest of it back. And then they can collect without taking an oath. Okay, so we're not going to apply it to that case because pogam shtar is not the same as collecting from orphans, right? There's pogam shtar where they're collecting directly from the borrower, the creditor. I'm sorry, they're directly collecting from the borrower. And our case, they're collecting from the orphans. So we're not going to apply it to other oaths that the father has to take. There, the father had to take an oath if they didn't collect the rest. The orphans here don't lose out because ein adam urish banav. No, they only said in the case with orphans from orphans and not orphans from the borrower himself or herself. Here's another case. Who does shachiv v'shavak arva? Now somebody died and left a guarantor for his loan or her loan. Sever of Papa, the name of Papa said, Hanami de Lolosi Falahu. Now that they're collecting from the Arev, maybe we won't need the orphans, to take the oath that in other words, again, the person died and left an Arev, the borrower. Now the creditor wants to collect from the orphans. Normally you have to take an oath. But in this case, he's skipping the orphans and he goes to the guarantor. Now, since it's the guarantor, and let's say that also the Malva died, and now we have orphans collecting from the guarantor of the orphans, so the guarantor of the loan itself. So Sever of Papa Lememar, Hanami de Lolisa Falahu. Or Rav Nachman said, we're not adding any cases. So this is from the Arev, not from the orphans. But Amarle Rav Huna Brid Rav Yoshua, Rav Papa, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said to Rav Papa, Atu arva la batariyat me'azil. Wait a minute. This is basically like collecting for the orphans because when the guarantor pays, the guarantor is going to go straight to the orphans. It's just a way of bypassing it, but in the end, the orphans are going to get collected from anyway. So this is really one and the same as orphans collecting from orphans. Another case. Somebody died and instead of leaving orphans, had no children, left their brother. Well, that's not orphans. So Sever of Rami Barchama Lememra Hanami Dilolosi Balav. This would be another case we're not going to add. But Amarle Rava, just like in the previous, we said, no, this is the same thing. This also is the same. Mali Shalabakdani Abba, Mali Shalabakdani Achi. What's the difference of saying, my father didn't tell me anything about this, my brother didn't tell me anything about this? It's all one and the same. If that's not going to work, that the father can't pass on his oath to his sons, also won't be able to pass on his oath to his brother, and therefore also can collect the loan. Amar Rav Chama. Now we go back to, these were cases of maybe, right, the first case we actually did limit it. The second two cases we thought to say this doesn't apply, but in the end it did apply to those cases. Now we have Rav Chama who comes in. Rav Chama says, since there's no clear psak, is it Rav and Shmuel? Is it Rabbi Elazar? Hi, Dayan Rabbi Shmuel Avid. If the Dayan did like Rav and Shmuel, great. Rabbi Elazar Avid. And if the Dayan decided to yes collect the loan based on Rabbi Elazar and make those orphans take the oath, our father didn't tell us anything about this, then it works. Now, the way the Gemara, the commentaries understand this, what they really mean is you really should go like Rav and Shmuel, because if you're not sure, what do? You leave everything status quo and you can't collect anything. But if the Dayan decided to go like Rabbi Elazar and collect it, we just let it go. Okay, what's done is done. Amar of Papa. So therefore, comes Rav Papa and he says, "Hi shtar diatme." If orphans have a shtar like this, where they're supposed to collect from orphans, we don't tear it, but we also don't collect it. Meaning you can't collect, but you also shouldn't tear it and say, "Well, this is a useless shtar. Why not?" It's a little bit strange. If you can't collect it, may as well tear it up. Well, they can't collect it because maybe we hold like Rav and Shmuel. But they still don't tear it. Because if a judge were to use that shtar and say, yes, you can collect if you take that oath, it'll go through. So therefore, we kind of leave it. It's like left in limbo. Here's another case. There was a Dayan who ruled like Rabbi Elazar and actually allowed the orphans to take an oath and collect. There was a Talmid Chacham in the city. He says, listen, I'm going to bring you a letter from Israel that this doesn't work, which is fascinating if we talk geographically, because Rabbi Elazar was from Israel, and yet the rabbis in Israel were against, in later generations, against what Rabbi Elazar said. Amarle, lechitete, he says, listen, when you bring me that document that says the letter from the rabbis in Israel that we don't like Rabbi Elazar, then I'll undo the judgment. But until then, I already judged it and I'm leaving it. Atzal kameto Rav Chama. So they brought this in front of Rav Chama. Amarle, Hadran David Rabbi Elazar Avid. He says, listen, those judges that did like Rabbi Elazar, they did it already, and it's done and done. And as we said before, since we don't know who to hold by, if the judges already ruled, we're going to leave it as is. Okay, that's the end of that complicated sugya, and now we're moving on. Elu nishba'im. Now we go to the later part of the Mishnah. These are people who are nishba'im without there being any counterclaim. So Ata b'shuftin asking, I understand. These idiots, why would you take an oath if nobody's claiming anything against you? So we already explained this is how we explain it. We're going to explain based on this answer. No, what it meant is Elu nishba'im shelo b'tana bari ela b'tana shema. Like hashutafim v'harisim. If you remember, partners and a sharecropper and apitropos and the woman who's in charge of the property and the brother who's in charge of the other brothers, all these people can collect, even if they don't have a definitive claim. They're just worried that maybe there was some misdoing, but they have no any basis for it. They can make the other side take the oath, and that's why they're not idiots. They're right. The other side has to take the oath based on a claim, but it's not a clear-cut claim, and that's what they mentioned Lobatana. Tana. Now we're going to bring a bright about this. Ben Bayit Shambur. Now, when we said the Ben Bayit, which is the brother who's dealing with the property of the other orphans, one of the brothers for the other brothers, it's not like he's just an overseer. That wouldn't be the case. When would you make him take the oath? He's doing all the financial stuff, all the books, everything, and the payments, then they can make him take the oath. Now, why are all these people allowed to make the person take an oath? Mishum demore bahatera, because all these people, the partner, the this, that, and they're all handling the money stuff. They might just justify their behavior and say, "Oh, I could take a little more from me because in the end, I'm doing all the work." right? I'm the one putting in all the hours. They're just sitting there doing nothing, and I'm taking care of everything for them. But that's only they're allowed to take money if they made an arrangement. But if they were just doing it for free, they might actually think, well, it's okay if I take a little more for myself because anyway, I'm doing the work. But that is forbidden. And that's why they need to take an oath because there's reason to suspect that they've done something wrong just because of human nature. Amar Rabbi Yosef Bar Menumi Amar Rav Nachman, v'hu sheyesh ta'ana b'nhem shtei kesef. Has to be, though, that the claim is about something that's worth shtei kesef. Now we get into, right, Keman, Shmuel, is this Kishmuel, right, that we're assuming that he admits that he did something and doesn't admit to something else or something like that. So, or something, right? They're saying, even if it's not Moed b'mitzvah, this takana was instituted to be like Moed b'mitzvah. So it sounds like Shmuel because he said the Tana is shtei kesef, and that's what they say here, the claim being not the denied. But didn't in the end, with all those questions we had against Rav in the end, against Shmuel, didn't in the end we had a good question against Shmuel that showed that Breita, there was Rabbi Chia that held his Breita that held exactly like Rav, and which means that shouldn't we hold like Rav that the Tana has to be 2 kesef and a pruta, and it has to be just that the kfirah, the denial has to be 2 kesef. So they say ema kfirah Tana. What they meant is that the denial of the brother or the partner or whatever, whoever it was, has to be 2 kesef, and then it can match Rav. Chalku ashutafim varisim ibayim. Ma'u legalgel b'Rabbanan b'Durabanan. Can you have a Gilgal Shvuah if your Shvuah that you're obligated is a Durabanan Shvuah? Can we roll over it to another Shvuah and make you take an oath on something else? So Tanshma, let's learn from here. Lavai menu erev Shvi'it. If I borrowed money on erev Shvi'it before Shemitah, ulemotzei Shvi'it, and then after the Shemitah year came, nasalo shutaf o alis. Then we became partners, and it was the case where, and then we divided it up, and then I don't have to take the oath because we already divided it. You didn't complain until later. A megalgalin. Then we're not megalgalin because the loan from before the Shemitah year was already up. But Tama de Levayim and erev Shvi'it. It sounds like because I borrowed the money before Shemitah. To ate Shvi'it afkaate. Came Shvi'it, uprooted the oath. The oath from the Shemitah year was already canceled, and therefore you can't connect that oath to this oath. Okay? Even though, but it sounds like, right, you would be able to if it was any other part of the year. Now, the Shevuah of the loan is only a Durabanan Shevuah. That's a Shevuot Hesed. If you deny an entire loan, say, I paid it all back, we make you take a Shevuot Hesed. So, lo tema ha shar shnei Shevuah megalgalin. So now they say, no, don't say shar shnei Shevuah megalgalin. Don't say that that's what the inference is. Ela ema naselo shutaf oris erev Shvi'it, ulemotzei Shvi'it lavai menu megalgalin. Okay, so yeah, let's just go back for a minute. We have this case, from there we can infer that, right? We had a loan, Shemitah came, and then you ended up with some other business dealing. We don't take that oath and bring it here. But then they say, no, that's not what, but you would be able to do it if it was not a Shemitah year. You'd be able to move from one oath to the other, and that would show Megalgalim Midurabanan to another oath. But then they say, no, you can't say that hashar shnei shvuah. You could say a different inference. That in the minute we're going to reject that inference. You could say shar shnei shvuah megalgalin, but ema. What we really want to infer is you could be megalgalin also in that case, and Durabanan would be megalgal. But if you became, it would be the flip case. If first you were an aris, then the Shemitah year came, since that has nothing to do with Shemitah, and then you got a loan, then you would actually have to do it. But the problem is that can't be the inference because that's said explicitly. Okay? Because it says, and therefore from there, actually, from where it says it explicitly, though, you can understand the Megagalim Durabanan. Because that is the case where there's a Durabanan Shvuah of the Shutaf Aris, and then we're Megalgel it onto the loan case, the loan where you were Kofer B'Kol. And now you have to understand one important thing. Didn't we say the loan kofer b'kol, that was the Shvuah D'Rabbanan? No, now we're flipping it. Because that's a Braita. And Rashi points out, the Shvuah D'Rabbanan, Shvuah Hesed, if I completely deny a loan, that's all Rav Nachman. That was a chiddush of Rav Nachman. It didn't exist in that earlier time, and therefore it's irrelevant. And then, therefore, that's the oath that we're trying to say. Maybe you could be Megalgel, the oath of a kofer b'kol. In other words, take the oath of the Aris, and Megalgel it, the one that was in our Mishnah, the Durabanan, of a case where before you divided it up, there was someone who was suspect, made him take an oath about that. You could still make them take the oath about a loan that came after the Shemitah year because Shemitah doesn't have any effect on. Okay, and from there you can learn Megalgelim Durabanan. We're just going to finish to the end of the chapter. I know it's very late, but I want to leave less for the seal. Lakol Megalgelim chutz misachil she'em Megalgelim. For all oaths, we can be begalgel. Okay, we can basically take the Rabbanit oath and roll it over, to some other oath. Chutz misachir she'em megalglin. Other than, we go back to the beginning of our Mishnah. A sachir is someone who claims they were never paid. They really don't have to take an oath, but just to make the balabai feel better, we make them take an oath. That case, lo megalglin. Okay, because that's it's an extra oath that we just to make the balabai feel better, but we really believe the sachir. Rav Chisda Amar, something very similar. L'kol ein mekilim, we're not lenient about any case chutz misachir de mekilim, only in the sachir case where we're not megalgalim. So my benachai, they say the same thing. Ikabenai liftoach lo. What does it mean liftoach lo? If the other side didn't say let's be megalgal the shvua, the court comes in and does it, and that's the first case. L'kol megalgalim chutz misachir shkem megalgalim. In all cases megalgalim, meaning the court comes in and says we're going to do this. In l'kol ein mekilim is if the other side says, let's be megalgal shvua, meaning the court didn't initiate it, if the other side does it, well, we're not lenient. And we say, yes, we're megalgal shvua, except for the sachir case. So there's a nafkamina about the whole halacha of megalgaling. Is it court instituted? The court will say it even if the other side doesn't suggest it, or is it only if the other side suggests it? Unless we're going to finish in one more second. Hashviya mishametet, manani mile. Where do we get the shviya mishametet? Amrav gidol amarav damakra zed dvar shmita afilu dibor mishametet. Right? The Shevuot is mishametet, even a Shevuot that comes from a loan, because zed dvar shmita, even words having to do with a Shevuot, with a loan, even an oath. Okay, also it's mishametet, and with that, Hadran kol nishba'in. Finish the chapter. We'll finish. We will learn the entire 8th chapter at the Siyum on Sunday, Be'ezrat Hashem. So really quick summary. We ended with the case of the two Eidim Makrishim. We had some difficulty, and Rav Chisda resolved it. We went to the Chemvani with the Perot, talked about what the difference is between the two cases, and in which cases Rabbi Yehuda agreed with the rabbis, actually. Then we got to the Yatomim, and we had that long sugya Rabbi Shmuel, which case, right, the Yatomim lo yiparu ela b'shvua to other Yatomim, right? And then we got into the whole Rabbi Shmuel, who basically said there are certain cases where they can't collect, and we had a whole hullabaloo about it. People weren't so happy with this takana because it discourage people from loaning money. And after we finished that very long sugya, then we got to the last sugya about the aris and the shutafin, and about what case do they actually have to take an oath in, when don't they have to take an oath, and then we asked, is there gilgal shvuah from a durabanan? Can you be megalgal shvuah? Which in the end we said you can. With that, we finish. Sorry for the very long daf, and wishing everyone a safe day.